Whiskey is an amber-coloured, high-strength liquor, which is particularly beloved in Scotland, where it's spelled like this, and Ireland, where it's spelled like this. Some people call it firewater, most likely because of the invigorating burning sensation you'll feel whenever you drink even a tiny sip of it. But there might be another reason for this name. For example, that whiskey, or whiskey, can totally go on fire when it's in concentrated form. That's what happened one fine day in Dublin in 1875, and in quite spectacular fashion too. The day was the 18th of June, and the place was a bonded warehouse on a corner in a maze of streets known as the Liberties. Within this particular bonded warehouse were stored nearly 5,000 hogsheads of whiskey. A hogshead, by the way, is just a quite big barrel. Also to be found inside this warehouse on this particular evening was, unfortunately, a fire. The whiskey was meant to be there, the fire was not. We don't know exactly who started it, but this was the 1800s, and there were fire hazards all over the shop. Could have been embers from a fire, could have been ash from a pipe, could have been overheating linseed oil, like with the Great Fire of Edinburgh. Where it came from doesn't matter. Point is, there was a fire, and there was also a massive quantity of flammable liquid in huge wooden barrels. As the fire spread, these barrels started bursting, and highly flammable whiskey started gushing out. Given the sheer amount of liquid stored in this warehouse, a flood would have been bad enough. A flood that's also a fire was a whole new level of bad. And to add to the mayhem, one of the first buildings swamped by the fire was a pig pen. So now, not only was there burning whiskey flowing through the streets, there was also a herd of burning pigs. We can only imagine what the residents of Dublin made of this rather surreal situation. But at least none of them stuck around long enough to get swallowed up by the tide of flaming whiskey. The surrounding streets were evacuated with a promptness that was perhaps inspired by the absolutely god-awful sound of a pig on fire running through your back garden. So, nobody was hurt, but we can't say the same for property damage. There was, suffice to say, quite a lot of it. Dozens of houses, shops and workshops were set aflame by the burning tide, and for one horrible moment it looked like a convent. This convent was about to be consumed as well. Thankfully, a last-minute miracle change of wind drove the burning whiskey away from the convent and into an entire street of family houses instead. Phew, lucky escape. Now, the Dublin Fire Brigade at the time was headed by a bit of a maverick named Captain James Robert. His style of firefighting could be described as, shall we say, unconventional for the time. Previously, for example, he dealt with a blazing ship in the harbour by sinking it, which, you have to admit, would definitely put the fire out. In this case, Captain Robert decided that water wasn't the way. And that was a good decision, because adding water to a flood would really just make it more floody. Add in the fact that whiskey floats on top of water, and you'd really just be making the situation a whole lot worse. Instead, he ordered his men to use sand and gravel to smother the flames. It was a pretty shrewd move from old Captain Robert, but alas, it didn't work. The burning whiskey just saturated the sand and kept on burning. They needed something thicker, something muddier, something more impermeable. And very quickly, they found it. Look around Dublin today and you won't see many horses, but back in 1875, they were everywhere. And the natural result of horses being everywhere is that horse manure was also everywhere. People made a living scooping the stuff up and taking it to depots around the city so that it could be sold as fertiliser. Now, however, these depots were raided and the manure was triumphantly returned to the streets, where it was used to build a stinky wall. As the whiskey flowed through, the flames were smothered, and the fire was finally conquered. And the best thing about it all? Not a single person had been hurt during the whole entire episode. A miracle. If only it had ended there. What happened next is a bit embarrassing, to say the least. People loved a good fire back in those days, and so a big crowd had gathered. And once the fire was out, never mind the steaming bank of horse manure, as far as they were concerned, it was now just a flood of free whiskey. They'd be doing the city a favour if they helped out and made a little bit of that flood disappear by drinking it. And so that was exactly what they did. People came from far and wide and used every vessel imaginable to scoop up generous portions of burning hot, manure-infused, flame-roasted whiskey. Some people even whipped off their boots to perform history's most disgusting shoey. There's an important detail here that you have to know. The whiskey stored in Lawrence Malone's bonded storehouse had not yet been diluted for sale, so it was many times stronger than you might expect. Anyone who noticed the zesty taste would probably have put it down to all the fire and manure and debris. They wouldn't have realised that they were drinking a beverage that might have been as much as 90% alcohol. Here's where the casualties started. Hundreds of people were sickened by the super concentrated booze, and around a dozen, plus one pet dog, even died as a result. Typically, the English newspapers had a good old laugh about it. They generally left out the detail that the whiskey was deadly even in small quantities, and made out like the people of Dublin just couldn't help themselves when a free drink was on the table. Or, well, not the table, the gutter. You get my point. But thinking about it, taking a swig of whiskey from the street during a once-in-a-lifetime whiskey flood is, yes, a bit gross, but not an entirely crazy thing to do. People certainly eat stranger stuff these days, and there likely would have been a bit of a party atmosphere once the fire was finally extinguished. So while it's easy to mock, instead, why not ask yourself which of your friends would be most likely to take a swig from a burning whiskey flood if they got the chance? Anywho, once everyone had figured out not to drink the death whiskey, the flood was mopped up, the last building fires put out, and the area gradually rebuilt. Time went on, and the Dublin whiskey flood faded into memory, becoming a beloved piece of the city's folklore. Go there now, and you'll find a modern distillery on site, and very little sign that the area was ever submerged beneath a tide of burning spirits. Will it ever happen again? It seems unlikely. Modern distilleries take fire safety a lot more seriously, and even if it did, we know the manure trick already, so it should be easy enough to contain. But just in case it ever does, there is perhaps a cautionary tale here. If you're ever walking along and come across a blazing river of pig-infused, manure-filtered gutter whiskey, maybe don't give it a shot. Bye!